We'll get started. Thank you. Welcome to the 12th meeting of the 44th Legislature of the Board of Internal Economy. We'll start off, whoops, here. There we go. We're started. And we'll start off with the first one, the minutes of the previous meeting. Are there any questions or comments? Mr. Bossal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I took over as opposition House Leader, I made a commitment to my staff that I would read through the standing orders, and I'm sad to say that I'm only halfway through, Mr. Chair. But in the half that I've looked at, it says in the minutes concerning the report to Canadians that it would be tabled in accordance with the standing orders. I did a search and I couldn't find which standing order requires it. So I would like clarification from the clerk as to which standing order that is.
It's not the report, sorry, it must be a mistake in the minutes. It's not the report that to Canadians that's required to be tabled via the standing orders. It's the report on committees, the liaison committee report.
Perhaps that needs to be clarified then?
That's clarified?
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Very good.
Okay.
Any other comments on the minutes of previous meeting? Pas de questions ou commentaires sur le procès verbal?
No questions, no comments about the previous meeting. Very well, then we move on to number 2, matters arising from our prior meeting, business arising from previous meetings in general. All is clear? Very well.
3, le groupe de travail sur le VPLT.
The long-term vision work group, we will hear from Mr.
Who is the chair of the working group on LTVP and Centre Block Rehabilitation, and Mr. Rob Wright, Assistant Deputy Minister, Science and Parliamentary Infrastructure, Branch Public Service and Procurement Canada. We also have Daryl de Grandmont, Director, Centre Block Program. Who will be Mr. Wright or Mr. Entre?
Well, I'll be presenting.
Okay. Monsieur d'Entremont.
Merci beaucoup, and thanks. It's great to see everyone. I was trying to think I was the jinxed presentation that keeps us from doing our work, so I thought maybe I have to come back in September and do this. So it was great to be able to present. As chair of the House of Commons Long-Term Vision and Plan Working Group, I'm here to update the board on our recent activities, including some items brought for our joint meeting with the Senate's LTVP subcommittee. At our joint meeting with the Senate on May 28th, we reviewed the food services proposed for Centre Block and the infill options proposed for the Central Courtyard. We reconvened on March 25th, 2022 to discuss underground network connections. And most recently, on May 6th, the House of Commons LTVP Working Group received an update from former parliamentarian Bruce Stanton and chair of the Block 2 Design Competition, and an update on the proposed public cafe in the Parliament Welcome Centre. And then again, on Friday, we were able to have a discussion on a number of items, and I'll finish off my discussion with that. I will brief you on these in a little more detail to seek endorsement of the board and on recommended direction. So first, I'll start with the Centre Block food services. Les options d'aménagement. No, that's the wrong tab. Les services de restauration pour l'édifice du
Centre Block Food Services. During the joint meeting, the House of Commons Administration Services gave us an overview of the restoration needed to offer the Centre Block food services, and they suggested what locations would do well. Here are the 5 types of food services being proposed. The parliamentary dining room, which will be returned to its original historic location in the Centre Block. Second, the cafeteria at B2 level in the Welcome Zone. The public cafe at B1 of the Welcome Centre. And fourth, these services for the parliamentary precinct in the ante chambers, for the committee rooms, level 6, and so on and so forth. And 5, distribution machines, which would be situated in each building. The House of Commons administration was invited to get back to us with answers to a number of questions. We asked them for information in greater detail to justify putting 50 seating places in the new public cafe and to ensure that the cafe be easily accessed by all members of the public in the centre of the Parliament.
Drawing is in front of you. House of Administration returned to the LTVP working group last month on May 6th with an update. The public cafe is now more centrally located near the entry hall of the PWC and includes an increase in flexible seating capacity of 89 seats. The working group concluded this aligns favorably with international parliamentary trends and would be a welcome service addition to the facility and its users. And the working group is satisfied with the proposal. As you can see, as you come in through the security section, the cafe will be sitting off to the right-hand side. So those folks that probably don't want to bring coffee on the inside, or if they're waiting for a tour, they can hang off onto the side and grab a coffee or a quick sandwich if they need to. So the working group is recommending approval by the board for the proposed location of the food services in the center block and the Parliamentary Welcome Center, including the new public cafe capacity. Now we go to les options d'aménagement.
Now, the options for the Centre Court. During the joint meeting, the House and Senate administration groups presented 3 possibilities for using the space on levels 4 and 5, the Senate and the House of Commons. And the options deal with the Centre Court infill at the Hall of Honour. The idea is to create space at the 6th floor, a shared parliamentary salon. This has been approved by the LTVP working group at the House of Commons and the Senate subcommittee as well. The proposal for the new location would be at 4 and 5 at the infill of the Centre Court. The Senate feels that discussions should be continued about how to lay out the 4th and 5th floors before a consensus can be reached. And we will return to provide them with a recommendation on this issue as we move forward with it.
The underground network connection. At the March 25th, 2022 joint meeting, PSPC and House of Commons administration presented a high-level overview of a network of underground connections that will ensure safe and efficient movement of accredited people and goods to support operations in the precinct. The objective is to link the parliamentary buildings, including parliamentary office units, or POWs, and committee rooms in the blocks on the south side of Wellington Street. This will then include the introduction of an underground tunnels to connect across under Wellington Street north-south. A tunnel network will have multiple elements: efficient operations for the business of Parliament, access egress redundancy, linking buildings to the chamber. Security for parliamentarians is important, and assessing strategic entry connection points will be a key consideration. 5 tunnel options were presented. All options ran north-south, connecting building blocks south of Wellington to the parliamentary triad north of Wellington. So the joint working group supported a concept of multi-use, single-level secure tunnel system to be shared by all partners. The tunnels would be as direct as possible from the POUs to both chambers, minimizing level changes, corridors, complicated circulation paths, number of elevators, and staircases. So based on the operational information and advice received from the Senate and the House of Commons administration and PSPC, complete with an options analysis summary, the Senate LTVP subcommittee and the House of Commons working group agreed to recommend for approval to our respective boards. The tunnel connection W and D, which create a loop as the north-south alignments, would be a part of the overall material handling and underground network concept, and I think the map is up there. So if you see W and D, so if you sort of makes a big circle around the precinct, so you can get in and out. And then finally, Block 2, the architectural design competition. With Centre Block, the renewal of Block 2 is a critical piece of public works and procurement to Canada's long-term vision plan for the parliamentary precinct. Following the last update on Block 2 to the BOIE on May 2021, Stage 1 of the architectural design competition was finalized in September 2021, with a short list of 6 proposals recommended to proceed to Stage 2. The 6 shortlisted competitors submitted their proposals to PSPC in March of this year, and on April 11th, the teams presented their design concepts to the public online. As you may recall, my predecessor, Bruce Stanton, with Senator Robert Black and MP Anthony Housefather, were delegated to represent the parliamentary portion of the jury for Stage 2. The jury met over a 3-day period, April 20, 21st, 22nd, to review the submissions and recommend the winner as well as the second and third place finalists. So if one doesn't work, you can always go to the second and to the third if that's possible. On May 16th, Ziedler Architecture Incorporated in Toronto and associated with David Chipperfield Architects of London, the UK, was named the winner of the architectural design competition for Block 2. NEUF Architects here in Ottawa, in joint venture with Renzo Piano Building Workshop from Paris, is the second place finalist in architectural design competition for Block 2. And then Watson McEwen Tamura Architects here in Ottawa, in joint venture with, and I'm going to make a mistake on this one, Benich Architekten in Boston, is the third place finalist for the architectural design competition for Block 2. The next steps for Block 2 project have started with Public Works, working with the contract with the winning team, with the aim of onboarding them in the fall of 2022, so this fall and into spring of 2023. The goal is to start the construction on Block 2 in approximately 24 months from signing of the contract with the winning team. In parallel, Public Works will continue to work with representatives of the House of Commons and parliamentary partners on a more developed building and functional program. The working group will return to the board with updates and seek endorsement of the House of Commons when it's appropriate. And lastly, the working group met late last week for discussion on the strategy proposed parliamentary office units, or the POWs, for Centre Block. We have a fairly good understanding of the strategy, and we'll come back to brief the board and make a recommendation as the design progresses with more detail. There was also a presentation by PSPC on their efforts on Indigenous engagement with respect to the Centre Block and in a wider context of the LTVP. We feel PSPC has approached this thoughtfully, and we have been more important contribution that will continue to evolve throughout the implementation. We hope to come back to the BOIE with any details that you may be interested. Thank you, and I'm happy to take the questions or actually share the questions with my partner in crime here, Rob Wright, or maybe with Michelle, depending on what the questions may be of our proposal. But there's a couple recommendations in here that we need approval on.
Very good. Questions and comments? We'll start with Mr. Julie and then over to Mr. Broussard.
Thank you to the LTVP working group. I know what an incredible amount of work this is, and having been briefly involved before we passed on the torch, and so our big thanks for all of the work that you've done, that you're doing, and that you will do in the future. I am particularly interested in the tunnel options, and it's when any of us visit other parliaments, the U.S. Congress, the European Parliament, all of them within their parliamentary or legislative or capital precinct have a tunnel network, and it's for simple reasons. It's a question of effectiveness, efficiency. What happens now, and what certainly happened since I've been on the Hill, is in wintertime, and we have the coldest national capital on earth. You go through this process, particularly when you have visitors, of leaving your office building, getting on the coat, the hat, everything else, going across the street, then taking everything out, going through another security screen, and getting into finally the area where you're actually going. Sometimes, if there are committee hearings, that can be multiplied multiple times during the course of a day. It's never been efficient to my mind. It's people are dressing and undressing, taking coats off and mitts and everything else many times a day, and it seems to me that having a tunnel network will make a big difference in terms of making us more efficient and spending more of the time that matters helping our constituents and being engaged in these the national debates that are so important. So when I look at the tunnel plan, and I understand the recommendation is W and D, to form that circuit that would go East Block, Centre Block, West Block, and then through to Wellington and through to Block 2 and Block 1. I think that is just practically speaking an excellent catch-up for Canada's national capital being on par with other world capitals in allowing people to move from one building to the next. My two questions are, Is there any provisions in terms of the tunnels, or has that discussion happened yet around security screening from one to the next, taking visitors through, for example, which is something, this will save an enormous amount of time, but I would be interested in knowing what security screening, if any, is contemplated. And then secondly, we've got two office blocks, Confederation Building and Justice Building, that are 10 feet, it's 10 feet between the two of them. And then it's only about 100 feet from the Confederation block to the Wellington. But I don't see provision for a tunnel network that would join them. And it seems to me that that's a relatively easy thing to do because of the short distances involved, but also would add to the efficiency if we have dozens of office suites in those two buildings to allow members of Parliament and their visitors to move seamlessly through the West Block to the center block. So is that contemplated? I see a material handling node, but is there a possibility of extending the tunnel network as well to incorporate those last two buildings? Thank you for your work.
Well, first of all, I'll start off with, this is an elephant of a project, so we have to eat it. We have to sort of take it on at one bite at a time. So, you know, we can only go so far. It is contemplated to continue to the other two buildings, which are of course Confed and Justice in it. But again, we need to get a few first things built first, and that's why the W and the D are sort of the first on our proposal. Maybe I'll let Rob to sort of take on the security screening side of it, but just to that last point, that it is contemplated. It's just I don't know where it will fit in the time frame.
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. So to the point of security, and we'll be working very closely with the security partners on this, the concept is that it would be credentialed individuals who would be able to move through the tunnel. So that would involve some type of system of secure access to the tunnels. Those details, which are very important, have not been worked out yet, but that is exactly the plan. And to Deputy Speaker's point on the question of connection to Confed Justice, that is the plan. So this loop concept and Tunnel W could provide the opportunity to have a direct contact into Tunnel W from Confed Justice. So that's one of the benefits of that, as well as it making use of already built infrastructure that we did as part of the West Block and the Visitor Welcome Center Phase 1. The other option that you mentioned of connecting into the Wellington Street tunnel and then making your way from there is another option. We'll be going through that option assessment. It would probably make sense for that to be a secondary step that we would do in conjunction with the rehabilitation of the Confederation Building, but those decisions haven't been taken at this point.
There's also a huge cost factor that goes in this. I forget what the estimate would be, but this tunneling under Wellington Street and to the side is not a cheap endeavor by any stretch.
Very good. Mr. Julian, all done? Okay, very good. Now we'll go on to Mr. Broussard, followed by Mr. McKinnon.
Let's talk about that, shall we? Obviously, there's something in the ballpark that you can estimate the cost as being. Do we have any idea what the estimate of the cost of the tunneling network could be?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. So you can see the distinction between the blue and the pink tunnels. And so there's a portion of the tunnel infrastructure that was already designed and constructed as part of the West Block and Visitor Welcome Center Phase 1. So we're making use of that portion to reuse it. The Parliament Welcome Center that we're building as part of, in conjunction with the center block, that will form the rest of that kind of northern horizontal part of the tunnel. So that the Parliament Welcome Center will serve, so there won't be any additional tunnel network there. So that whole northern spine will be in place at no additional cost.
North-south tunnels.
It's the north-south tunnel. So we do have an order of magnitude construction-only cost for those north-south tunnels. The combination of W and D would give you a order of magnitude construction only about $185 million. So what is not included in that, and this is important because those are construction only, there's no design costs, there's no contingency costs, there's no risk costs, and no escalation costs. So that is a, kind of the kind of construction only kind of, and which is one very important component, and that builds the cost up from there. But that's the order of magnitude construction cost for those north-south tunnels.
So I assume then, Mr. Wright, at 185 million, we can pretty much ballpark from a percentage standpoint of what those additional costs may be, like the design costs, the contingency costs, the escalation costs, all that stuff. Typically, of the construction costs, what percentage would be factored into some of those other costs so that we could end up at that ballpark end number of what these tunneling systems would cost?
And that varies a bit project by project, but you could say those construction costs ballpark end up being around 40 to 50% of the overall project costs.
So we could legitimately be looking at roughly about a $250 million project for these tunneling costs, if I'm understanding you correctly.
And again, we have to do the
Ballpark,
due
I
diligence here,
understand.
but
$250 million.
It's a significant investment. There's no question about that, sir.
Okay. And a coat costs $199, so there's a big difference. A nice winter coat. The next question I want to ask is the issue around Wellington Street. I'm not sure how much time left we have before the votes, Mr. Chair.
I'm not sure either.
Where are we at?
Our trusted deputy speaker.
22 minutes?
was
Okay.
25? We got lots of
Okay,
time.
so the issue around Wellington Street, of course, is being debated now. There's different levels of governments that are engaged in discussion on the pedestrian use of Wellington Street going forward. I know that there's been some discussion between the city and, of course, parliamentary staff. Has the possibility at all of Wellington Street being pedestrianized been taken into account into the working group's deliberation on creating this new tunnel system?
So, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So certainly the deliberations to this point have taken that into account, but it has not, I would say, affected the perspective of the business case in the sense of, so importantly is, if there is a desire to have a tunnel network, now is the time to proceed. If we were to look at, hone in on the cost issue, doing this at a later point, it would be a lot more expensive. So doing this while we are doing Center Block and the Parliament Welcome Centre and Block 2 is, there's a lot of savings. There's still a significant cost to doing this. There's no question about that. I think the question that you pose, though, maybe is a better responded to by Parliamentary Protective Service or from a security perspective, if that's kind of the angle that you're coming at it from.
Yeah, there was that. And the other angle that I was looking at is with as little traffic as there is on Wellington right now, if that does happen in the future where it is pedestrianized, does that affect the overall efficiency of building these tunnel systems, or does it actually affect the cost in a lesser way?
Right. So the other side of this, and this will be coming back in the future, is the material handling. And so so one of the drivers of this, so there's multiple drivers. So one is, as MP Julian pointed out, is kind of the functionality of Parliament for the parliamentarians and staff. The other, as you pointed out, is with regards to security. The other side of it is currently each of the facilities have a standalone loading dock and material handling system. So this would be moving to a more centralized, a nodal approach, which has the benefits of creating a more efficient operations for Parliament, with both savings from an infrastructure perspective and savings from an operational perspective over time.
Right. Just by way of comment, Mr. Chair, on the tunnel system, it's difficult, or I hope we can all find it difficult to agree that, without an absolute cost. I mean, we're dealing with projected costs here of, 185 million just in construction costs, and then there's all of the contingency costs, which by my account could be $250 million. Without that final cost figure, I expect that it won't be that much. It may actually be greater. So I would like to see a little more certainty, if this was to be a supportable item for this committee, of what those costs will be. I understand that we're dealing with projections here, but projections have a tendency of getting out of hand real quick, as we are all aware of. So I guess in light of the concern that I have, are there other aspects of the LTVP projects that this board is being asked to make a decision on today with your proposals? If we were to defer this perhaps to a meeting in the fall now, I suspect, would we risk project delays and additional cost increases? I think that would.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So there's really critical design work that we're actually, I would say, lagging on now, on figuring out how these tunnels would insert into the Parliament Welcome Centre. And so the design of the Parliament Welcome Centre is live and proceeding very quickly. And I would say that it is a little pulled behind because of decision making, which that's all understandable, but certainly it would have an impact. There's no question about that on our ability to further refine designs with impacts on construction downstream and costs.
Okay. I appreciate your frankness on that. Next question is the nature of the ongoing dialogue with the Senate over the center block infill proposal. Is this still a matter of the Senate seeking more than its 30% proportionate share of center block facilities?
Let Michelle have that one.
This time, in terms of the various options, and obviously the option, one of them is the 30-70% proportion. Another one is one floor to each institution, and the other one is a totally shared space of the two floors. I'd say these options came from the administration. There was a beginning of discussion between parliamentarians, and the parliamentarians feel they need to continue that discussion. So there's no kind of I cannot say that there's a deadlock at this time with the parliamentarians.
So there's.
And maybe I'll add to it as well, is that in my work right now with Senator Tanis, I mean, we've only had the one meeting at this point. A lot of things were clarified at that time. I think, as we start back up in September of trying to figure out what's going to happen, at least on the 6th floor of how that shared room is going to work. And I think we're going to continue that other discussion on those other two floors. But, in my mind, we're 70% of what happens in that building, and we're going to make sure that it's shared correctly.
Okay, so what is the concept for the parliamentarian lounge on that 6th floor? What are you thinking about?
Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's so for further discussion with parliamentarians, but the idea, the concept comes from one of the original intents of the center block was to have some common space, shared space within the building. That's been lost over time, driven by functional requirements. So the idea of using an infill over the Hall of Honor was kind of twofold. One is, as you just mentioned, to provide additional meeting space and additional workspace for parliamentarians in a shared way. And for the 6th level, the idea was to have an more informal gathering space for parliamentarians to come together for whether that's events, for conversations between senators and parliamentarians and members from all parties, to be able to have a space to kind of come together in a more informal basis, given that the parliamentary restaurant was really the only space left in the building which was kind of common ground. The reading room, for example, which had that original intent, had been lost over time for functional requirements. So we really tried to go back to the original spirit of the building, of symmetry, bringing light in the building, and creating common space for parliamentarians, many of whom do not have offices in the building, where there's a place and space for them to work, to have conversations, to meet, as the building is meant to support the operations of parliamentary democracy.
Okay. So going back to, in the report in Block 2, there was the design winner was there, the second and third place. Is there any backup system in place with the second and third place winners that if the contract can't be fulfilled with the winner, that we could fall back to those positions?
Thank you very much for the question. Absolutely. The whole process was designed that way. All of those firms are very well aware of that. We've had those conversations up front. We are in negotiations with the first place firm at this point. I'm very confident that we will come to a successful conclusion, but that backup plan is there. It's good to have it's prudence, and it's good to have that backup plan there.
A couple more questions. Construction is expected to begin in 2024, 2025. When do you expect this to be in use?
Thank you very much for the question. So the idea here is to kind of bring online the center block, the Parliament Welcome Center, Block 2, and this tunnel infrastructure all essentially at the same time, so that when the center block opens, we have a fairly there's still some important pieces remaining to be done, East Block, the Confed as well, but that we essentially have a parliamentary precinct that is an integrated campus that supports the operations of Parliament.
Okay, and finally, the parliamentary office unit strategy, what exactly is that? Just so that I'm clear.
Michelle.
Yeah, it's basically looking at the office, I'm going to say remaining in the center block, but and consulting with parliamentarians and the working group in terms of the size, allocation, standards, and your needs.
Okay, thanks. That's it. Thank you.
Very good.
It's
Now
also-
we'll
it's
go on to
also
Mr.
in the
McKinnon,
sharing
followed
as
by
well
Mr.
of-
Julian. Mr. McKinnon.
Sorry, I think the deputy speaker had something else to add.
I stuck
I'm
my
sorry, go
nose in. I
ahead.
shouldn't have.
Please go ahead.
Sorry, Chair. No, it is also trying to make sure that sharing between the different groups as well. The government, the House leaders, the clerks, make sure all they have their units, how those units are constructed, what that sharing is going to be between the Senate and Parliament. So a good piece of work is being done there to make sure that it's shared correctly.
And I expect that there will be consultation among
Absolutely.
House leaders, staff, as to what that's going to look like and how that's going to, because I think the same thing applied here in West Block as
Yeah.
well, correct?
Our understanding is that consultation is ongoing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Very good. Mr. McKinnon, followed by Mr. Julian. Mr.
Donc,
Kidd.
je note d'entrée de jeu qu'on a.
I note at the outset that we do have a vote in 11 minutes. My aim was, I know that Mr. Julian does have other questions as well besides mine, but my aim was to finish this before the vote, allow all of us to ask our questions, but I'm not sure we'll get there. Briefly, I have had the chance and the pleasure of working with Mr. Wright and his team as a parliamentary representative to procurement, and I've worked with Mr. D'Entremaux, and prior to him with Mr. Stanton. And to my mind, they've done remarkable work representing us with the House of Commons on this project. My other observation, if I may, perhaps linked to what Mr. Brassard has asked about eventual costing, is that, well, based on my experience, the governance of this project is sizable. We have two administrations, two houses really, a good deal of consultation. We have the Capital Commission involved as well, National Capital Commission. I think at some point we might want to reconsider all that. So from what I can foresee, and perhaps this is a comment really of interest, mostly to Mr. Brassard, my good colleague, rather than to our visitors, is that the slowdown caused by this governance structure is considerable and may truly lead to rising costs. We must, at all stages of the project, keep this in mind. We must make decisions promptly, relevant decisions, decisions that must be taken. And yes, the work that must be undertaken as well has to be seen to in order to ensure collaboration with our good friends at the Senate. We had a good discussion last week. Mr. Entremont, thanks. When it comes to the space at the Centre Court infill, this is my personal opinion, when we were breaking down the spaces, segregating if you wish, well, good idea, but by definition that's not an optimum use of space. I would think that in order to divide or share the space with the Senate, we need to keep that in mind. My other observation is that the prior building certainly did lack space for small informal meetings, working space. We know that there are fewer MPs on the Hill, at the centre block at least. So there will be a greater need for small group meetings, small groups of 6, 7, 8 people. Also working spaces for MPs who will not be near their personal offices. Thus, I certainly invite us to work closely with our good friends at the Senate to maximize this space, make it flexible, keep it available to all parliamentarians, and I know such use will be of the greatest use to MPs. As for the tunnels, I think that the safety, material handling points that Mr. Julian has brought up are essential. It's also essential that we have a network, of course, and that all parliamentarians be able to use the network, parliamentarians and their staff, who will make better use of their time by being able to move more easily through the precinct. I think that good work is underway there. Let me finish by saying that I think that it's really extraordinary, the process that has led to the choice of design. It's really been well carried out. The Government of Canada could certainly take advantage of this type of process in many other situations. So I would like to congratulate you for this exemplary work. For all these reasons, I support both the site chosen for the cafe and all the other recommendations, really. Well thought through. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I think that we have a comment from Mr. D'Entremont. Yes, 2 matters. First, with Mr. McKenna and Ms. Sahota, we have a very good team. We have excellent discussions in committee about what we need to do, and we try to move quickly. We do know that we have such good support. Second, when we go into the House, of course, for MPs who are at a greater distance, the first place when you enter the door into the House, there will be antechambers, secondary chambers, which can be used to meet in meetings of 5, 6 people. Telephones will be provided. This will be of great support to MPs stepping into the House or near the House who aren't near their offices.
First floor, underneath the chamber, that will be all support stuff for the MPs, including the lobbies that will be structured a fair amount differently than what we're used to, but hopefully all of those design elements will really incorporate into what Mr. McKinnon's trying to purvey there as well.
Okay, Mr. Julian.
Mr. Chair, if we have a vote in a few minutes, should we suspend? Yes, the members of the committee must make this choice.
and go vote, or do we want to vote on our machines and on our phones and then continue with this?
I'm going to go in the chamber and vote.
Okay, I believe we want to go to the chamber.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, then.
Moi, je pense que c'est ça,
if
mieux
it's-
qu'on suspende.
Yes, I think we should suspend. Good. If that's not a problem, then we will suspend until the end of the voting period. And we'll return after the vote. As soon as the vote is over, please do come back to this very room. Thank you very much.
I believe there were some questions being asked. Mr. Julian, you were in the middle of a question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I had a series of questions I wanted to ask. Mr. Brassard's questions around the overall cost, I think, are very relevant. And I wanted to look at this issue of the tunnels from a cost perspective, both in terms of what the parliamentary precinct would gain, but also what we would lose if we didn't put the tunnel network in there. And so my questions were, to start, the cost of the West Block and East Block tunnels that we had originally. The West Block tunnel was known as the bathroom tunnel because it was all, it was lined in yellow tile, as I recall. And the East Block tunnel was far nicer. So the cost of those two tunnels being built, the existing tunnel network in the parliamentary precinct, Mr. Wright, you mentioned that the West Block renovations actually had provision for a tunnel network. So I'm wondering to what extent the existing tunnel network is in place and can be built on from that. And then my first set of questions, I'll have a second set of questions, is around the absolute necessity for material management and what would be required if we put aside the issue of pedestrians or MPs or visitors or anyone else or staff using the tunnel network. What is required for purely material management? Because I certainly know that was an issue around the West Block tunnel project as well. So those are my first three questions. I'll have a couple other after that.
Thank you very much for the questions, Mr. Chair. So it's important to note the initial tunnels that are mentioned had to be disassembled for the Centre Block and Parliament Welcome Centre project. So those tunnels that connected the old Centre Block to the old West Block and the East Block have been disassembled. But you're quite right. As part of constructing the West Block, there was a tunnel infrastructure that was put in place, and it was put in place with this forward path envisioned. If we go back to 2017, Parliament and the government endorsed the concept of this tunnel infrastructure. So that was put in place with with what we're talking about today in view. The cost of that tunnel infrastructure, phase one of the Visitor Welcome Center, was $129 million. That will, its permanent infrastructure will connect into the Parliament Welcome Center and will essentially enable this connection point for Tunnel W. So that it's going to be used not only for the current vocation of the West Block, but the permanent vision for the operations of the Parliament Welcome Center, of Parliament. The second question around material management. So if the tunnels did not proceed, we would have to go back essentially to the drawing board on a strategy for material management. That would probably lead us to kind of going back to the traditional approach of having a loading dock on each individual building, of which, so those would have to be designed in and constructed, currently not designed for the center block, for example, and not planned for Block 2 or the future. So I don't have a cost estimate for you today on that, but there would be a significant cost of putting in place that infrastructure for material management. There would also be an important cost from an operational perspective for the House of Commons and the Senate to operate that on a building-by-building perspective rather from a more centralized. The last thing I'll mention there is that a large part of this really is about creating an enhanced security posture for the parliamentary precinct, a more secure perimeter. As soon as each and every building has to have an individual loading dock, you're bringing large trucks into each and every building, which would be a consideration that the Parliamentary Protective Service would have to consider if that were to be the path forward.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. So if the cost of auxiliary costs that you mentioned a little bit earlier on of building the tunnels is that very rough estimate figure, can you give us a very rough estimate figure of reconfiguring the designs of each of the buildings, applying loading docks for each of those buildings, and then applying the operational cost of no longer having a centralized material management, but rather going back to the 20th century, kind of each building has its own material supply. Is that in the tens of millions of dollars? Is that $100 million? What would that cost be?
Yeah, I mean, I would. I want to be careful to give you estimates that can be useful for your deliberations. The cost would be significant. I could say that. Many millions of dollars would be at stake in that, as well as operational inefficiency. But I couldn't today give you a number that would really be useful to you, I don't think.
But there's an undoubted capital cost, and then there are much higher ongoing operational costs. So if we're looking at the parliamentary precinct over the next quarter of a century, whatever that cost X is, if it's $10 million a year, that over 25 years would easily reach $250 million.
So absolutely. I mean, the critical thing here, this is what we're trying to do here, is to design and construct hand in hand with Parliament an integrated facility that meets your needs for the next century and beyond. And so we're really trying to, any investments, we're trying to make sure that they are permanent investments that serve Parliament into the future, rather than a series of temporary investments that have to be later point that they don't serve. They're not, future-proofed, if you will, is perhaps the best term here. So this tunnel network, one of the benefits of it is that it provides benefits from a movement of people, from a movement of goods, from a security perspective, and it kind of provides max flex for the future operations of Parliament.
And it would be fair to say that the operational costs of not proceeding could well be as high over over an extended period of time and will be higher in the long term than not proceeding with this project.
I think if you look over the life cycle of these buildings, and we really talk in century life cycles for the investments that we're making, that you are definitely talking about very significant alternative costs of not proceeding in this direction.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful, because I think a figure is often daunting until you look at the alternatives, and then you see an equally daunting figure without the efficiency and without the ability to move. So it's not a question of buying a winter coat or not. It's really a question of what's the most effective way of proceeding through the coming years, so that operationally we're saving money and that we're not having the duplication that we've had up until now, where each building is supplied individually. And there are a whole range of downsides to that, as I think we're all aware, which is why every other parliament in a major industrialized country has moved to a model with a centralized material management system and pedestrian access to buildings through a tunnel network. It just makes sense. The U.S. Congress being, of course, I think the best example of that, the European Parliament being another one. Can I ask a final question? And that is, I have no doubt, looking at the proposed development, the W to D, that ring circle, which is very similar to how the U.S. Congress functions very efficiently, is obviously the best model. But if we went with I guess what I could only call a cheap version, which doesn't have the same flow, doesn't provide for the same security access, and that would be the A tunnel from West Block right across to the Wellington extended Block 2, Block 3 tunnel, and then E from the East Block right across from to Block 1. Those are short tunnels. I have understood that there is an existing tunnel from East Block that already goes to Langevin Block. So I'm not sure whether this is a new tunnel or a tunnel that would build on that existing tunnel that goes across to Langevin. What would be the cost comparison for that? And I certainly understand in terms of material management, you lose a whole advantage from the D recommendation, and certainly in terms of security, it's much dicier because people would have to move through the West Block, move through the East Block to access the south of Wellington. But is there a rough cost differential between the A and E scenarios and the WD scenario?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And surprisingly, there is not. While it's intuitive that shorter tunnel would be a lot cheaper, it's much more technically complex. Because if you look at the West Block example, the tunnel infrastructure has to go in and under the foundation of the West Block. You can see tunnel W kind of skirts around so it's much more technically complex, and we have to put in new stairwells and elevators into the existing West Block at the southern portion, and during and operating while the West Block is operational to serve Parliament. So it's very complex, and so it is actually pretty much a wash from a financial perspective, plus being a much higher risk approach. These alternative tunnels, W and D, can be implemented with minimal disturbance to Parliament, and you can see how they're kind of a straight shot, still technically complex, but a straight shot through the bedrock, rather than having to work underneath the foundations of the buildings, which adds a tremendous amount of technical complexity and disruption to Parliament, and with the associated costs that come with that.
Merci beaucoup pour les réponses. Puis,
Thank you very much for your answers. Given all the information that we have now received, I back the recommendation. It seems to make good sense. The cost of not approving this, what is recommended here today, is higher than the cost of setting in a material handling system ensuring access to all parts of the parliamentary precinct as here proposed. So thank you for answering the questions, and I appreciate your recommendations, which I support. Other questions and comments?
This is more managerial or rather than design. We now have a shuttle system on the Hill that operates on a daily basis. Would that shuttle system be needed if we have the tunnels? And if we don't need it, what is the cost on an annual basis of operating those shuttles, both in replacement costs for the shuttles and operations not only in fuel, but in human resources? Would that be Michel?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm going to provide a high-level response because I don't have the details in terms of the cost, but obviously in terms of the shuttle service, which is needed for the transportation of parliamentarian and staff between various locations. Obviously, during time when the winter is the climate, the weather is not the best, there's definitely a cost, and with an underground tunnel circulation, that probably would be an assessment at that service, and it's going to be a decision for the future, but probably would be stopped. We've got a number of shuttle buses. It's over 10 shuttle buses that are quite costly, and that in terms of life cycling, we're trying to extend the life cycling of each of these shuttle over at the maximum that we can to have a maximum usage. But we definitely would have significant saving in both the equipment and also the staff needed to operate them.
Okay. Mr. D'Entremont?
And I also think when it comes down to accessibility for those who might have problems walking, we have a bunch of different mobility issues with members of the House of Commons. So I would say within the tunnel system, you probably would adopt more of an airplane kind of one of those golf carts that they use, and I think the amount of money that you would use on those versus on a bus would probably be far different and far cheaper to run in that respect. So there's opportunity for people to be able to.
It's interesting you should mention that, because my next question had to do with moving sidewalks like they do have in airports. Is that something that's being considered?
Thank you very much for the question. So we have not done a full assessment of those types of kind of different techniques to facilitate movement, but we certainly could, if that's the will of the committee. We could look at moving sidewalks and other aspects as well.
Are there any other questions? I'm sorry?
Get your own golf cart.
Get my own golf cart. That's perfect. Electric, yes, of course. Might be hydrogen by then. I don't know. Questions or comments? I think we're done. I want to thank both of you for being here today and putting up with the vote. And I just want to make a comment on. When Bruce Stanton left, Bruce was the epitome of being a deputy speaker, and I thought, boy, this is going to be tough to replace. I just want to say, Mr. D'Entremont, you have been doing a wonderful job both on this committee as deputy speaker as well. And I understand you have an anniversary coming up as well. 25 years service.
It'll be 19 years of service, elected this August. It'll probably be 25 years as an
elected official,
political person on the.
Thank you for
Longer
your
than I
years of
should,
service
right?
and your years of service here on the Hill. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Now we're going to go in. Oh, sorry. Yes. Do we have consensus on the recommendation to proceed as we're okay? Very good. Now we'll proceed to in camera. Nous allons continuer à huis clos. Nous allons.
We will continue in camera, but first we will take a few minutes to set up the changeover technically. Thank you very much.